hits for the bench. Extra attacker coming on to even things up. To the net, Albertson scores!
The Extra Attackers Podcast with Maude and Jordan.
Hello everybody, welcome back to the Extra Attackers Podcast. Maude and Jordan back here once again, and we have actually a bit of a sad topic to open the show with today. We figured we would just start off with this to sort of get it out of the way, but it's something that's been weighing on my mind recently, which is the death of Adam Johnson in the English Ice Hockey League. Of course, rest in peace to him, and our thoughts are with all his friends and family and all the players, his teammates, who had to witness that, and the opposing players as well. Big discussion in terms of neck protection in hockey, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I've always, playing in goal, I've always worn a neck guard just to be safe. You get a lot of people crowding around the net, and I forget the name of that goalie, but you do remember back from like the 80s or 90s where there was that goalie that had his neck cut as well. And yeah, I've always done it, and I think it's a good idea. I think this situation is horrible, unfortunately. I was unfortunate enough to see the video when it was still, I think while it was still trending before it came out that he had passed, and I would say everyone should avoid that at all costs. It's horrible to watch, and I can't even imagine what his family's going through, what the fans of that team are going through. Like, especially the people who were there, who witnessed that in person. Like, I can't imagine that. That's horrific. And the player who cut him, who was nothing malicious. It was just an accident, fluke play. And I hope he's getting the help he needs as well through the situation, because there's really no fixing it. And I think it's right that people are starting to talk about the neck guards situation, because I mean, from my perspective, this doesn't need to happen again. But I know it's a bigger conversation than that. And I just feel for, of course, Adam Johnson and his family the most out of all of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I am also glad that you brought up the opposing player whose skate it was, because I don't know if you have looked on social media today, but there has been a lot of bullshit of people coming after him and specifically calling him a murderer and literal racism against him when certain people found out what he looks like, what his skin color is. And we just want to denounce all of that. This is something that I was kind of like doom scrolling last night and seeing all this shit, and it was pissing me off so much. So there was these sort of right-wing political accounts who don't post anything about sports at all, who got a hold of the clip, and they trimmed the clip so that you only see right before the contact of his skate blade already being right in the air, and you don't see the moment before where he gets bumped by another opposing player and then gets sent towards Adam Johnson. They deliberately clipped it to make him look worse, and then because you can't tell the race of the players in the footage, they specifically included two images along with the video of a very clear photo of Adam Johnson and a very clear photo of what Matt Petgrave looks like, and it's just tons of racism everywhere, and frankly, it's pissing me off. So just wanted to denounce all of that as well.
Oh yeah, no, that's horrible, and it's stupid people are doing that. Like, that's, again, don't watch the clip. I've seen the clip. It is completely an accident, not anything malicious. And even if it was something that was like, maybe it was a check or something that went the wrong way or something like that, where there was intent to do something, 99% of the people in these leagues are never doing anything with the intent to injure. And I feel like it's just super ingenuous to operate like this, like just to say that, oh, this was on purpose. And like, again, like you said, flagrant racism on these people. It's pathetic. Like, just stop talking about it. People are already hurting. You're just making the situation worse. And like, bringing up this narrative at all around a situation where someone died is horrific. Like, I can't believe there's people that are out there doing that just to push a political agenda. That part of it is disgusting.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it, man. Like, it really, like, I was already distraught enough from hearing about the incident, and I was purposely avoiding looking at the video because it's like, oh, I don't want to see that shit. I don't want to see a guy's last moments, basically, or what caused him to pass away. But then there's all these fucking idiots on Twitter going around calling him a murderer. And then at that point, I'm like, okay, I have to look at the video to see why they think that this was intentional. And it's literally impossible to gauge whether or not that could have been intentional from looking at it. So the fact that anyone is so, like, 100% sure that he was trying to slice a guy in the throat with his fucking skate in the middle of a fast-paced hockey game, that's such a ridiculous maneuver to even be able to pull off, like, at high speed while Adam Johnson is skating with the puck. Like, there's absolutely no way that he could have been trying to do that on purpose. And again, I don't think anyone should watch the clip, but in the full clip, it's obvious that Petgraves gets disrupted by one of Johnson's teammates as he's going across to hit Johnson. And it's also, this is a bit of an inference from me, but I think he might have hit like a rut in the ice or something with his other skate, and it causes him to lose his balance. Like, I think the fact that this incident has been posted by a bunch of non-sports accounts and people who don't watch hockey are now reacting to it is why we're seeing like such a kind of a witch hunt against this guy, which is really horrible, because you know that he's just feeling awful. There's no way that someone is psychopathic enough to do this during a game of hockey. I know obviously there's horrible people out there in the world, but they're usually not the types to be pro athletes. So it's just sickening to me. Like, I don't know, it's got me really pissed off.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think it's just awful that people are taking that narrative, and like, the player did literally nothing wrong. He didn't do any of this intentionally, and it's just super disingenuous to paint it that way. And even though like this guy, he did nothing wrong, it was just an accident, a very poor circumstance. He, like, even though like he didn't, that's not his fault, he's still taking all the emotions from this. He still feels awful. Like, there's no way to say that he doesn't. Like, he feels awful about what happened, even though he didn't do anything wrong. It was just complete, like, moment in the universe sort of thing. Like, he can't control that. And just throwing this other angle is just disgusting to someone else who's hurting in this situation. Like, I can't imagine going through that and being okay with stepping on an NHL rink again, let alone putting on skates, something like, and like, the whole goal is to everyone learn from it and come out of it okay. And they're just making that infinitely harder on this person that did nothing wrong.
Exactly. They're turning it into just a big like drama fiasco, which is just not productive whatsoever. And yeah, like you said, it's sort of like survivor's guilt, you know, when, say, if you have two people who are in a certain dangerous situation, like maybe a car crash or something, one person lives, the other person doesn't, and then you feel that feeling of like, oh, it should have been me, or sort of thing like that. It's not exactly the same with this, but when it's an unintentional accident caused by someone that results in a death, it's pretty similar, where that can totally weigh on the person. And like in 2023, with how we're trying to be more open about mental health and everything, we shouldn't be witch hunting this guy. Like, there is a British police investigation into what happened, but I have read from people who are in the community that this is a relatively normal procedure for like an unusual death. You know, they're just going to look into it no matter what, and it's not like a criminal investigation of like, okay, what did Petgrave do? It's just like trying to cover all bases, right? So until there's anything from the police that's like, oh, we think this about the case, people need to stop speculating about intent or anything like that.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's super clear that's not what's happening here. That's not what Petgrave was intending. And like you said, I think that's just an automatic response to an accidental death. I think that just makes sense that it would be looked into, and I don't think it's indicative of anything. Like, there's no way that Petgrave gets charged with absolutely anything, and these people peddling that garbage, it's not going to happen. And I guess the last note I will say about this is it came out today that the EIHL is moving to mandate net guards in their league. I can totally understand why, and I think it's probably the right decision. It's not happening right now. They're doing a soft launch, so to speak. They said today that they are strongly recommending it until the end of the year, and at the end of the year, it becomes mandatory. They're doing that because of supply issues with a bunch of other players getting net guards like right at the same time. But yes, it will become mandatory. And I guess the next question is the NHL going to follow suit in that? And I guess we'll see.
Yeah, I think even if it's not full on mandating net guards, I think a lot of professional leagues are going to be looking into encouraging it much more. And in terms of like you said, it's a soft launch in that league because they have to order a bunch of net guards and get them out to all of the players. It could be a case of just leagues increasing the availability of this protection so that they can have them on hand in case a player decides that they want to use it. And, you know, like they can just have them in the locker room if someone wants to. But yeah, I do think it is possible that mandates start happening. Like even just as soon as one day later, there was some Providence Bruins players in the AHL who were already wearing them. And so we haven't, I guess, it was confirmed that he had passed yesterday, and there was a couple of NHL games, but the news was still kind of breaking at that point. I guess more NHL games tonight. It's October 30th for reference. Yeah, I'm interested to see if any of the NHL players decide to be played a little more safe, because the thing for me with the net guards is there's really no downside to it. It's not like wearing it is going to hinder your play or anything. Like it's a little bit weird to me that like in Canadian House League we all had to wear them growing up, but then once you reach a certain age you just stop. Like I don't understand it. Like, is it the toughness culture in hockey where they're just like, oh, we don't need that much protection. We already wear so much gear. We don't need even more type of thing. It's weird to me that everyone just ditches net guards after a certain point. I remember like always wearing one in house league as a kid, but then like playing beer league type thing as an adult, then noticing no one wears them at all.
Yeah, I will say I did hear a couple counterpoints that I didn't think were awful. In that a lot of people find them very uncomfortable, which I can understand. Even wearing them, like consistently wearing them, I can understand. I don't know if that's enough of a reason not to wear them, but I understand they're uncomfortable. It can sometimes messing with like turning your head if you're not used to it and things like that.
That's fair.
The other one I saw, which I mean, you might be able to comment on a bit more, but I saw a couple people with asthma talking about how it was too restrictive for their airway wearing a neck guard, and it just made it too difficult to breathe. And some other people that had chest issues and things with their lungs said that it just wasn't really viable for them. So there are situations where I understand, but I agree with you that at the end of the day, it makes more sense than not, because the biggest hurdle is just getting used to it, in my opinion. So I think if you just like told players, hey, you got to wear this for the next 5 games, and then you get to decide, a bunch of players would just at the end of 5 games be like, oh yeah, I see no reason not to, just because at this point it feels normal, right? So
yeah,
that's what I say.
The asthma thing could be a fair point for sure, because like when I was a kid, I had the asthma, but it wasn't as bad as it is now as an adult. It's gotten worse. So if I was still playing hockey, and I stopped playing on our like beer league team because of my asthma, but I wasn't even wearing a net guard anymore at that point. So, you know, I never really thought about if it would affect that. So I could definitely see that as a fair point. Although there probably isn't a lot of like pro players with asthma. They probably don't get that far. So that might be more of like a beer league level thing. But yeah, just in terms of players getting used to it, I would think that it's a case of a few games and then they're like, you know what, this isn't so bad. Because there's been incidents in the past, like when people started saying that Petgrave did it on purpose, it was reminding me of Erik Karlsson getting stomped on by Matt Cook, and we were all convinced back in the day that he had done that on purpose. And I think I was like 13 years old at the time or something, so I was like, for sure, like Matt Cook is a fucking supervillain. He definitely did it on purpose. Whereas I don't think that now as I've grown up. But I do remember after that incident, a lot of players started wearing Kevlar socks that went higher up on the ankle to specifically prevent against that, because that was a very brutal injury. So I do think we could see a similar case here where guys just say, fuck it, even if it's uncomfortable, I gotta get used to the net guard. Or maybe even equipment companies will try to come up with some more comfortable net guards, like maybe ones that are built into your undershirt, like kind of a turtleneck sort of thing with a thicker padding along the neck. I think that could be a possibility.
That's a good idea. Everyone out there looking like Thomas Plekanec.
We need more guys rocking the turtleneck for both fashion and safety, I think.
Exactly, and shout out to him, retired this week. So good, what nice career. Career,
Leafs legend, eh?
Leafs legend, yeah. Everyone's favorite Leafs player. But yeah, I think that's a good idea. Working it into already existing equipment like a turtleneck or something is probably a good way to go. And honestly, we might just see like now, inevitably, I think players are going to decide to go to it at least in small numbers. Like not everyone's going to be super rigid, so that's going to increase the amount of consumption they have, and maybe with that newer market, they find better ways to do it. But at this point, yeah, I think it's a good idea to at least be thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think just to conclude this topic again, want to reiterate that our thoughts are with everyone involved in this situation, from the friends and family and teammates of Johnson and everyone who was in the building that day and had to witness the horrific accident. Just horrible. It's been weighing on my mind since I heard that it happened. And again, I hope that Matt Petgrave has been able to stay off social media in the last 48 hours, because it's been a shit show, and I hope all of that dies down. I hope that the outrage mob that is riled up against him just kind of moves on quickly, because it's not good. It's the mob mentality.
Yeah, agreed. And yeah, closing, loving thoughts to his family, Adam Johnson's family, and also Matt Petgrave and the entire team, frankly.
Mm-hmm. From there, for our next topic, I think we want to get into a little bit more of the off-ice drama that is not so sad in the Ottawa Senators. It's sad for us because, as you can see, we are a couple of Sens fans, but there has been a bunch of shit this week that has just... It was a ridiculous week, wasn't it? Like, we didn't know
Insane.
any of this shit was coming, and then it kind of all popped off at once. So I guess maybe we can start off with the Pinto gambling suspension, because that was the news that broke first. And I did have a chance to talk about this on Game Over, so I'll throw it to you first to lead the conversation. What are your thoughts on where we stand with the Pinto suspension right now?
I feel like I'll probably echo a lot of thoughts that you said on that Game Over, but all in all, I find it strange that it was for so long and it wasn't NHL related gambling. And it makes me want to know what happened, because on the surface level, it seems extremely harsh for something that might have been like, I don't know, like a proxy bet, I think is the biggest rumor right now, is what it was. Shane
Mm-hmm.
Pinto gave his account to a friend and he bet through that or something. Um, but it's crazy to see what else the NHL will suspend for, and how little those suspensions usually are. And then you have one person maybe gambling, or like not even them gambling, but a proxy gambling situation, and the NHL cracks down hard on that. And I understand it's because of revenue. Gambling is huge in the NHL. They don't want to undermine that. But it just seems like too much, unless like we fully know exactly what happened. And I think there's a confidentiality agreement with Pinto, so I don't know if we'll ever really know, to be honest, until like way later. But it just seems like too harsh is the one thing. But at the same time, I guess it is kind of a blessing in disguise for the Ottawa Senators. They don't need to worry about fitting in Pinto's cap hit for another couple of months. And there's talk that Pinto's happy with how the Sens handled it, the fact that it didn't leak earlier, and he might take a lesser contract because of that. I think Elliot Friedman has said that on a few occasions, so maybe it works out in the end. But it seems like a really harsh suspension, and it seems like a bit of a contradiction for the NHL to be so harsh on something that gambling they slap in front of everyone's faces, including players. It's on Shane Pinto's freaking helmet when he's playing, for God's sake, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's too harsh. It's a little bit of a contradiction. And I think that all in all, while it kind of helps the Sens, assuming they don't need Pinto money wise, still kind of another situation where the league looks like a bit of a joke for a decision, and we've been seeing that too much lately. But yeah, I guess that's kind of my thoughts on it.
Yeah, like, just the fact that they have so much gambling advertising. Like you said, Pinto literally will play with a gambling ad on his helmet. It's like, it just seems like a deep sense of irony in this whole thing. And, after the suspension was announced, they went around to the rest of the players in the league and gave them sort of a checklist of like, okay, here's things to avoid to make sure this doesn't happen to you. But it does kind of feel to me like the NHL fostered an environment where it was potentially easy for a player to screw up and violate their rules because the rules weren't incredibly clear. The fact that they had to go after the suspension was announced and tell other players, okay, don't do this, and like, what, you didn't do that before? Like,
That's what I was wondering.
it just seems like, frankly, a little bit of a joke to me. And like you said, with the vagueness of it all, in my mind, it's possible that like what he did was worse than we think, just because of all that confidentiality. But also because of all of that, it makes me lean towards this punishment is too harsh, just because we don't know. Like, if you're going to be that vague about it, it will make people think that it's no big deal, right? Like, you could go either way. You could lean either way. So it's a weird situation. I think the main thing for me at this point is that Pierre Dorion got extremely lucky that he didn't make a trade to make cap space for Pinto and then sign him before this news broke, because Elliot Friedman reported that it broke around training camp or during training camp, and then that's when they kind of stopped all the negotiations with Pinto. So there was an alternate timeline entirely possible where we traded away Matthew Joseph with a pick or something, we signed Shane Pinto, and then he receives the suspension, and then that would have been a fucking mess at that point. So I have to say the Sens themselves were extremely lucky with how that played out in terms of timing.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like, it could have been so much worse if we actually gave up an asset to make contract space. And I mean, salary cap is at a premium right now in the NHL. Not a lot of teams have it. It would have really limited what the Sens could have done, and I think the price would have still been high. Like, even unloading someone like Kubalik, which was what a lot of people were thinking near the end, would have been difficult. And he's not a bad player.
Yeah, I wanted him, but right the day before this suspension was announced, I think that was when we did the game over for Ottawa versus Buffalo on the Tuesday night, and I remember saying on that show, like, oh, Kubalik has 0 points, let's just get him out of here and get Pinto in,
but 1 point now.
Yeah, he got a goal, so things are on the ups, but I remember just saying, like, oh, get him out of here so we can get Pinto in, and luckily, we didn't have to trade a guy like that. We might as well just keep Kubalik for the rest of the season now. You don't need to move him. And even when Pinto is going to be back in January, he can't demand any reasonable salary at this point. Like, he'll have to sign for his qualifying offer or league minimum for the rest of the year, I'm pretty sure. I doubt that he will be able to have any leverage whatsoever.
Yeah, I'd be super surprised just with this whole situation getting suspended for so long. And I mean, as well, the fact that the Senators handled it by all accounts very well with him, I think it'd be very weird if he was trying to demand more or trying to go back to the previous discussions and being like, oh yeah, that's what I should still get. He's not going to do that. So, I mean, because of the situation, I guess you get to keep the gang together, which is good, but you lose Shane Pinto. So
it's tough because we were all hoping to have Pinto in the lineup sometime by November, but then he would be replacing a player who has a bit of a bigger cap hit. Now at this point, then we don't get to use him until the end of January, which is rough, and then he will be even further out of game shape at that point.
Right.
Might have to do some conditioning games in Belleville once the suspension is lifted, I think. But at that point, so it's you wait longer to get Pinto into the lineup, but at least you don't have to move as big of an asset to get him in because of the salary. I would assume he will sign for less than $900K, and then getting him in the lineup at that point is just a matter of sending someone else to Belleville and then putting him in. So
exactly.
Hopefully the Sens can be in the playoff race at that point, and then we can just stick him into the lineup as a bit of a trade deadline acquisition for free. That's the best case scenario for the team at this point, because I don't think we're really going to get any more details on what happened with the actual suspension, so it's hard to judge the guy at this point without knowing for sure. It's just kind of a case of okay, that sucks, and I think as a team we just got to look forward to when we are going to have him back.
Yeah, exactly. And I think shout out to Ridley Gregg though. He's been very good in interim. So I'm glad it's kind of nice that he continues to he gets to continue to be in the position that he's in as the third line center. He definitely deserves it. So that's another, I guess, silver lining, if you will, to it, that Gregg has been so good. So not all bad. Hopefully we last out till then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Ridley Gregg, as we record this podcast, first in NHL rookie points, one ahead of Connor Bedard. So you heard it here first. Ridley Gregg is better than Connor Bedard.
Hot take. Yeah, I agree. Ridley Gregg for Calder.
But of course, it is not all positives for the Sens, because we also have this random shit being brought up from 1 to 2 years ago, depending on because there was 2 trades that involve in this scenario, in terms of Evgeny Dadonov being traded from Ottawa to Vegas by Pierre Dorion, which happened 2 years ago. And then 1 year ago, you had Vegas trying to flip Dadonov to the Anaheim Ducks, which is where the problems arose with his no trade clause. I think probably everyone knows the story by this point in terms of Dorion messed up and didn't disclose the no trade clause to Vegas. But I have to say it is mind-blowing to me that Vegas had Evgeny Dadonov on their roster for almost an entire season, up until the trade deadline, right? And they never figured out that he had a no trade clause. Like, is there no contact from his agent? The agent never mentioned it, or they never talked to the agent about it. The player never mentioned it to the GM or anything like that. There's no like internal league resources to look at his contract and check that. Like,
they never went on cap friendly.
They never went on cap friendly.
They never went on cap friendly. That would have had it.
I guess they were just looking at other teams on cap friendly, and they weren't looking at their own page. Once Dadonov became their own player. But yeah, there's no list of no trade clauses. They don't just have like a resource like that in the league, which I find kind of funny. There should just be a list of everyone. There should be a spreadsheet. It's like, okay, here's the player this team currently plays on. List all those players by which team they're on, and then to the side, it's like, you can't trade me here, here, and here. That should be like easily accessible to anyone, so that even if you're trying to acquire a player from another team, you can easily just look and see, oh, can I actually acquire him, or does he have us blocked? But apparently that's not a fucking thing, and apparently that means that Pierre Dorion is the devil and should lose a first-round pick over this. Apparently, is the rumor.
Apparently. I want to say that like what I'm about to say is very speculative, but I did hear it on the 32 Thoughts podcast today. Sorry, when I was listening to it. And it seems like the whole reason that this is coming back up is Vegas wanted it to be known that it wasn't their mistake. I
thought everyone knew that though.
That's what I thought, but like the way that Elliot was talking about it, he made it sound like they wanted it to be like out there, like this is exactly what happened. It definitely wasn't us. Like we definitely didn't mess up. And I think it's just really weird to punish Dorion at this point for something that happened like 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And like he forgot a trade list. The trade was voided. Like it was a mistake, obviously, because you're supposed to submit the trade list along with the player. And it seems like they forgot. But the NHL already reported on it like 2 years ago and said, oh, yeah, they won't place any supplemental discipline. And now there's rumors that it was going to be a first round pick. Like, granted, Elliot Friedman and Jeff Merrick on the podcast did say that they'd be very surprised if it was a first round pick.
Thank God for that, giving me some hope.
Yeah. And they said like there's a lot of certain factors that like wouldn't make that make any sense. Like the fact that Andlauer is the new owner, and he wasn't around when that happened. Mm-hmm. So now you're penalizing his team for something where he wasn't even around.
That's a very good
when
point.
That took place.
Mm-hmm. He would be pissed off. Is like, I just bought this franchise, and then we're losing our first round pick over some shit that I wasn't even here to know about. Like,
exactly. And I understand that Dorion is still here. So he's technically the guilty party in this. But at the same time, like you already said, this you're not going to continue investigating this. Like they said 2 years ago, like we're not moving on in this. And suddenly they bring it back up, and like again, rumor to be a first round pick. And if it's actually a first round pick or anything substantial, it's an absolute joke. Like how, like again, this is the point everyone's talking about. But how did Chicago not get a draft pick or two taken away for how they handled the sexual assault allegations? They faced basically no discipline besides the fact that Stan Bowman and Joel Quenneville had to leave the organization. That was about it. Or leave their respective organizations, I should say. And that was as far as it went. No draft picks lost. Combine testing, which I think is way worse than this, to be honest, as an infraction, was a first round pick. A couple more, I think, like a first and second or third or something like that. So I think if it is a first, it's a joke. If it's like a fourth or a fifth, like maybe a third, I would be like, okay, whatever. Like, it's stupid that we're being penalized for this, but
at least it would be mostly inconsequential from a fan perspective.
Exactly. It'd be mostly inconsequential. So still waiting on it, but I think it's a really dumb situation. The fact that it's back in the news cycle is stupid, and the fact that the Senators are being penalized for it, potentially, nothing's confirmed yet, is also stupid.
I think the point from the Vegas perspective of we want it to be clear that this was not our fault whatsoever, I guess it's kind of fair, because I was just saying, like, how did they not figure it out after they had Dadonov on their team for so long, which I do think is still a fair point. But also I feel like the way that it was reported at the time, everyone knew that it was Dorion who really messed up. So I don't know why. I feel like it was done and dusted. Like no one was really making fun of Vegas for the Dadonov scenario or anything at this point. And I think in terms of any dealings with future players or agents, in terms of like, oh, we don't like how you handled the Dadonov situation, or like you tried to trade him somewhere where you couldn't. That's like a bad thing to do to the player. I think people would give them the benefit of the doubt because everyone knows that it was Pierre Dorion who messed up. So
Right.
I feel like it might be a little bit of a case of Gary Bettman just catering to his like prized expansion franchise, like his Golden Boy team. No pun
Yeah.
intended, I guess. But I feel like it's a little bit of that, right?
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. Like, it just seems so weird and so out of left field that I wouldn't be surprised if that was part of it. Just trying to satiate them because they're still annoyed about what happened and they don't want to look bad.
Mm-hmm.
And even though, like, you're absolutely right in what you said before, how is there no like league-wide resource for this? And I remember when it happened, they talked about, hey, there should be a league-wide resource so that this can't happen.
Yeah,
I don't know if there is now. I would have to look into
I
that.
hope there is.
I would hope there is, but that's also a failing on the league that
Mhm.
this wasn't a thing. Like, how wasn't this a thing?
Exactly.
And you're gonna punish the Sens for that? For
Mhm.
not like you're creating this environment where there could be a slip up. Of course, that is someone's fault. That is Dorion's fault. But guess what? There wouldn't have been a slip up if this was already a mandated thing. So yeah, if it's a harsh punishment, that's ridiculous.
It's also confusing to me how the NHL decides on these punishments and fines for teams because, for example, the Arizona one, that one makes sense to me because it was doing training sessions with undrafted, unsigned prospects who you did not have the rights to. They were not members of your organization. And that directly relates to draft picks because you're kind of skirting around the whole process of drafting someone in before you can even do this type of training with them, right?
Right.
So that one, to me, it makes sense that they were fined a draft pick. But then the Chicago situation, on the other hand, I don't understand why that was just a money fine because this relates directly to draft picks because you are drafting more 18-year-olds into this organization every year who are vulnerable to what happened to Kyle Beach, potentially. Like, obviously, the guy who committed the atrocities against Kyle Beach, he is gone, but you covering that up as an organization, you look horrible. So like, for example, if I was a young prospect or a parent of a young prospect getting drafted to the Blackhawks, I'd be a little bit wary, right? Like these guys don't have a good reputation for handling their players to the degree that they covered up an entire sexual assault. And then I forget which member of the organization it was, but then someone gave the guy a letter of recommendation to go diddle someone else, right? At a high school. So
Yeah, I think that was Joel Quenneville, but
So-
I could be wrong.
yeah, and then they're trying to get him back in the league too. Like, holy
Right.
fuck, idiots. But then somehow that doesn't take away draft picks, even though that situation directly relates to bringing young players into your organization and how you treat these young men when something goes wrong. When Kyle Beach had an issue, everyone just kind of shrugged it off and ignored him and was like, nah, it's not that big a deal. And like he was getting made fun of and stuff. Like, you don't lose a draft pick over that, where this sort of thing could potentially happen again. And then in the situation with Dorion and Dadonov, it's like, what the hell does it have to do with draft picks? What does it have to do with young players whatsoever? Like, Vegas, all they missed out on from not being able to trade Dadonov to Anaheim was contract dumps. And they were actually paying a draft pick to Anaheim to take Dadonov. So the only thing draft pick related is that Anaheim didn't get to have a free second round pick for taking Dadonov. But obviously they didn't want Dadonov that much anyway because they didn't sign him in the summer.
Right. Yeah, no, those are great points. Like you said, what happened with Kyle Beach directly relates to the power that the organization has over the players it drafts. Everyone that they draft wants to make the NHL, wants to play NHL games. And that power dynamic is exactly what created the Kyle Beach situation. And the fact that they weren't punished, or at the very least, that opportunity wasn't taken away from them for what happened is kind of a joke. Like, honestly, I think they should have forfeited their first round pick for the next 2 or 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that should have been their punishment.
Yep.
You don't get any start players. You have to suffer with this for a while. And the fact that that wasn't the punishment is a joke. The fact that this situation is somehow worse and could result in a worse punishment, also a joke. Like, I will tell you right now, Michael Andlauer would rather pay a fine than lose a first rounder 9 times out of 10.
100%.
If you find him like a 10 grand or like even more than that, gladly would pay it. But instead you're being really harsh for some reason. Like it just doesn't make any sense. You have to treat these situations proportionally. Otherwise you look like a joke. And again, the NHL looks like a joke in this situation by enforcing this. And again, this is all dependent on the eventual punishment penalty and all that. So this is speculative, but the fact that like this is even a rumor, kind of a joke. And I mean, the main person who broke this, Alim Martian, who initially broke this, he said that the 2 sources that he talked to told him it was a first round pick. I'm not sure how accurate that might be, because I feel like if they haven't announced the punishment, there might have still been like negotiations for punishment. So I feel like that's probably changed by now.
Yeah,
most likely.
I'm hoping that what he heard was like the original proposed punishment, and then maybe they're able to negotiate it down or sort of convince the league to make it less. I'm hoping that's what it ends up being with Friedman and Merrick saying that they would be surprised at this point for it to be a first round pick. I hope that he just heard like the early workings of the story where maybe that was proposed, but hopefully it doesn't end up being the case, because it would be bullshit.
Yeah, it would be bullshit. That's where it ends. I can't believe they keep shooting themselves in the foot with these decisions. Like it's crazy how they operate. Like they treat every single situation like in a vacuum, which is not how you should handle you like this. You should learn off the past mistakes, the past times where maybe you haven't suspended enough, or when you suspended something that you shouldn't have, and stuff like that. But like continuously they show that they don't know how to grow at all. It's just frustrating.
Yeah, so I was hoping that we would get some sort of update on this situation before recording this, but obviously we did not. I hope that I'm just like quickly refreshing my Twitter feed just to make sure that there wasn't like some shit that popped up while we were recording. I don't think so though, because if it did, it would be very obvious to see here. But yeah, the punishment will most likely be released before our next episode. I doubt that it would take a whole nother week, so it's going to be interesting. We'll get to react to whatever that ends up being. But from there, I think we will finally talk about a little bit of on ice stuff. Specifically, the Heritage Classic was the biggest event this week. 2 crap teams going at it. It was the toilet bowl. You know the meme of the hydrogen bomb versus coughing baby. I saw someone say that this was just coughing baby versus coughing baby.
That's pretty good, actually. So that's a top tier meme.
Yeah, but the Oilers did end up taking it in a pretty decisive score, which doesn't really surprise me, to be honest, because despite both of these teams, the Oilers and Flames, having bad starts, I think that the Oilers are the more obvious pick to turn it around for a variety of reasons. So I'm not surprised that they were able to get the job done, especially with McDavid coming back into the lineup. I just watched the recap at midnight last night because I was out. I don't know if you watched any of the game or at least saw the highlights.
I saw parts of it and a couple of highlights as well. So
yeah, did you get the sense that Edmonton was just better?
Oh yeah, no, it seemed like Stuart Skinner was good early, gave some confidence to Edmonton, and they were able to blast through and continue just unleashing their very potent offense. And it seemed like after like the early goings, it quickly became evident who was going to win. And honestly, like I don't know what you do if you're Calgary. Like you had 2 teams coming into this environment where both teams were down. They had awful losses on Thursday. Both of the teams did. They were at their lowest, and one team was inevitably going to get bumped up from this. But the fact that it was that much of a 5-2 ass whipping, like if you're Calgary, I don't know what you do, man. Like Huberdeau has 5 points in 9 games. Kadri has 2 points or something like that.
He finally scored in the 8th game or 9th game.
Exactly. And Uyghur had a nice play in that game.
That was also, he only had 1 point heading into the game too. I dropped him in fantasy, and then he immediately got 2 power play assists right after I dropped him. So
it's the mod curse.
Yeah, right, exactly. If those, I don't have any more Calgary players to drop, unfortunately. So he's the only one I can help out by getting rid of him.
No, exactly. But yeah, they're just on a downswing, and again, on 32 Thoughts, over the last couple of weeks, Friedman has been talking a lot about how Hannafin and the Flames are getting closer and closer on a extension, and how the summer gave both sides to think after it was initially reported that there was no way that was happening. But today he's like, this is where it's reaching a pause.
That
Like
makes
this is the
sense.
first hang up I've seen, and it makes sense. Like you can't blame him. The team is really going nowhere. Their future doesn't really look that promising because they have all this cap invested in veteran players who aren't producing. That doesn't suddenly change unless you're like horrendously lucky. And I don't see that happening. So I don't know. I don't know what to think about Calgary, man. It's kind of just like it's watching a slow train wreck.
It's it's so tough because when they made the Matthew Tkachuk trade, everyone was surprised at how good it looked on paper in terms of, oh, they got all this value. They got a first round pick and they got they got a winger who's almost as good as Tkachuk. Not anymore. Doesn't seem like
No.
it. And a top 4D as well in Uyghur. But it turned out probably bad in that they had to sign both of these guys to expensive 8-year deals. Whereas if they, to be fair, the trade with Florida probably wouldn't have worked without taking salary back. But if there was an option to get more just futures instead for Matthew Tkachuk, it might have been a better idea at this point because then you could sell off some of your other guys like Lindholm and Hanifin too, who are expiring this year. And that's the tough part is that you have half of your core locked in and they're struggling. For being new to your team, just like Huberdeau, Uyghur, Kadri are all only in their second years with the team, and they're still struggling, even with the coaching change. We all figured that Daryl Sutter was the problem, and then these guys would be scoring points again next season, and it's not happening yet. So you have all those guys locked up, but then you have the other part of your core in like Hanifin and Lindholm, who's supposed to be the number one center, both unsigned. So it would make sense to me to trade both of those guys for futures, but then you still have all these other dudes being a waste of space that you would prefer to trade, but you have them locked up for 8 years now. So it's a mess from a team building perspective.
Absolutely. And you can't move the Kadri or Huberdeau contracts. Like they're too long. It's too much money. You can't do anything. You just have to take it, right? Like you got to just wait till those contracts are over and potentially move on. So it looks really ugly. I will say that hindsight is 2020. I think at the time, like if I was Brad Treliving, you make that move 10 times out of 10. Like if Matt Tkachuk is like, I am leaving, this is definitely happening. There's nothing you can do. You have to make that trade. It doesn't look as good now, though. You're absolutely right about that. It would have been nice to have more capital invested in the future, potentially from that trade. Would have been close to like the same value. I don't think so. I think that's where you lose some value potentially. But at the same time, it would be way easier to trade players like Lindholm and Hanifin to be like, okay, we're not really going for anything. This is where we reset. This is where we rebuild. Because being stuck in the murky middle is the worst. And kind of how the Flames are trending. And it looks like it's going to be that way for the next like decade, honestly, with how long these players are locked up. And that's not where you want to be. So I don't even know what the Flames do. I think it's hard to be a Flames fan right now.
I do think selling is still the right option because at least with those guys locked up for way too long that you can't trade, it sucks that you can't get assets for them, but at least if you sell what you can still use those big money guys to reach the cap floor, right? Like you still need someone making money on your roster. Like looking at the cap friendly, Mangiapane has 2 years left, like one more year left after this season. Then he's also UFA. So if he can get back to like 30 goal pace sort of, which will be difficult on Calgary the way that no one is scoring on that team. But if he can at least prove himself to remain as like a solid second line winger, you can get some good assets back for him. Maybe even if you trade him a year ahead of time before he's going to be UFA. Then obviously Lindholm, Michael Backlund, they extended, of course, maybe unfortunate timing on that. They extended him right before the season because I bet if they hadn't yet, he might be more in the Hanifin camp where it's like reconsidering at this point. But you can probably trade Mangiapane, you can trade Lindholm, Dylan Dubé, RFA, maybe you keep him, maybe you don't. And then two of their top 4D, like Hanifin and also Tanev, are UFA, so you can move both of those guys for assets. Those will be valuable guys at the trade deadline, paying for veteran top 4D. Teams will pay up for that. And then like the rest of their decor, other than Uyghur and Anderson, are also UFA. Mostly depth guys, but like maybe you can get something for Zadorov as well. Jacob Markstrom, 2 more seasons after this year at $6 million. He's kind of been struggling as well, but I could see maybe in a retained salary scenario, maybe a team would take him on, a team that's desperate for goalies, like maybe the Kings or something. if they don't do great using Cam Talbot for a whole season, because Phoenix Copley is not really stepping it up anymore. Like, that's a rough situation there. So I could see there being some teams interested in Jacob Markstrom in the future. So at least there is some stuff you can do to go into a rebuild and retool. But again, it just sucks that you can't trade the best guys. Like, I could maybe see a team going for Uyghur because his cap hit is good. It's just the term that he signed until he's like 37 or 38 at this point that makes it rough, and the drop off in point production. But I'm sure that there are teams out there that have seen how he played before, and they would be happy to have him at a $6 million cap hit, especially if they can move some salary back the other way. So I do think there is some wheeling and dealing that the Flames can do, but it has to be in the direction of just a straight up rebuild. And then unfortunately, like, Huberdeau, Kadri, and Backlund are all just kind of stuck here and along for the ride. And like, I guess Rasmus Anderson too, he's probably their highest value player in terms of like the contract combined with the skill level, with 2 more years left after this year. So maybe you can improve the team within the next 2 years and maybe get him to stay, or maybe you end up selling him off in a year or two as well. Could be a fire sale is what I'm saying. I think the Flames need to light it on fire and do a fire sale.
I'd agree. I think that's kind of the only way you could go. And like I said, you don't want to get stuck in the murky middle. So I think you need to do something to go towards one end, either the bottom of the standings or the top. And I mean, it's going to be interesting to watch them this season. Like, they're already a storyline and 10 games in. So
yeah, interesting other than what actually happens on the ice, because God, they have had some boring ass games. I think
that is true.
They had back-to-back home games that I believe were a 3-0 loss to the Blues. Like, how do you get shut out by the Blues in 2023? Shutout loss to the Blues, and then they lost 3-1 to the Rangers, which, to be fair, it was against Shesterkin, but also, like, from what I can tell, it was a pretty uninspired game. And then you go to that outdoor game and you get thumped by Edmonton, so rough stuff in Calgary.
Not feeling great. Yeah, not feeling great for them.
But I think that's where we're going to wrap it up for today. Gone on pretty long already, just with a few topics, but I think that was a pretty interesting episode. Lots of stuff to get into, some sad stuff, some more light stuff in terms of I guess making fun of Calgary, but it's I don't know,
Yes.
lots of drama and bad shit going on in the hockey world. I hope that we can come back next week for a bit more of a upbeat show, even though I do think it was still interesting topics here today.
Oh yeah, no, it was a fun episode, and it's unfortunate what's happened. And I remember, like, before we started going into doing like the weekly like news coverage for this, I was wondering, like, will we get enough like every week to fill a show? That I don't have that question anymore. Easy. Every single week. And at times I do think at times I wish it was under better circumstances. But again, there's a lot to talk about, which is good for us. And I think there's a lot of interesting storylines that we're following, like Calgary. So it's going to be fun to watch them develop overall.
So yeah, if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to Extra Attackers Podcast. Leave a like on the video. Maybe share it around if you enjoyed it. Everything helps. Just getting started from scratch on a new show. So we're gonna probably be back next week. I think the weekly format is working for us. We were kind of just improvising the format, but kind of maybe these Monday shows, after the weekends are always really exciting in hockey. Always lots going on, specifically on the Saturday nights. So maybe Monday episodes will become a thing now. I mean, I guess recording on Monday anyway, because this will probably go up Tuesday morning. But you get the point. Lots of stuff coming up for Extra Attackers Podcast. Thanks everyone so much for watching and listening.
Yeah, take care everyone. Thanks for tuning in.